So we started this series a few weeks ago, studying through the book of Joshua, a series called Brave, because I believe we're just one brave decision away from a better life. I think you're just one brave decision away from stepping into something better. So we've been studying this, following the children of Israel and their journey toward the promised land. Last week, they made it to the promised land. So we can now experience what life is like for Israel in the promised land. And here's where things get a little more difficult for them, because now they face their biggest challenge and their biggest enemy, their biggest adversary to date. The wilderness, that was kind of a survival experience. Now it's battle. Now it's wartime. And they face Jericho. Jericho is a very fortified city. It has the biggest army. It's a city that was at the crossroads to the ancient world. It was whoever controlled Jericho controlled the roads. And so it became a very strategic city. And it wasn't just going to roll over and let Israel come in and take it without a fight. But God had given it to Israel. So it was up to Israel to follow the strategy that God had given them so they could experience the victory. And the same thing is true for each and every one of us. If we will follow the plan that God has given us, then we can experience all the things that God has promised us. So here today, I want to call this How to Face Life's Greatest Challenges. Because I think the strategy that God gave Israel is the same strategy that you and I can use to face life's greatest challenges. And we will all face different types of challenges at different times in our life. Joshua chapter 6, verse number 1. If you got your Bibles or on your phones or on the screen, the Freedom Church app will have all this. Joshua 6, beginning with verse number 1. It says, "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king, its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. And when you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. And the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up and everyone straight in. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. So here's the first key to face life's greatest challenge. And number 1, I need a simple obedience to God. Just simple obedience to God. So the question, we got to ask ourselves the question, why did the walls need to come down? Why couldn't they just go in and bust down a door and go in and slug it out? Why couldn't they do that? Because it's what the walls represented. The walls were the only defense to the enemies that were attacking Jericho. And it was a defense against attackers. So when the Bible says the walls of the city were destroyed, it meant that the city was conquered. Because if the army made it to the walls, it means that they defeated your army out in the battlefield, and now they've come to take your city. So the walls were the only defense against attackers. The other thing that the walls represented is that it spoke of a nation's God. Whenever Nehemiah heard that the walls of Jerusalem had gone down, it broke his heart. His heart was broken because it dishonored the name of God. So the walls of Jericho represented something more than just entrance into the city. And it would take a huge army to destroy the walls of Jericho, yet God is telling Joshua to simply march around the walls once a day for 6 days. Then march 7 times on the 7th day. Why this strategy? Scholars are kind of divided on it, but there could be 2 simple explanations why God would have them do this. One is to see the magnitude of God's power. What if God simply wants to show his people how the insurmountable task that this is? Because the walls of Jericho were 46 feet high. That's about as high as the ceiling is. Can you imagine standing here looking at a wall as tall as the ceiling and thinking, we're going to walk around this wall and shout and it's going to fall down? I bet there'd be some unbelievers in the house, but it looked impossible. Maybe God wanted them to see how impossible this was without God's divine intervention. And sometimes we need to face our problems in life, realizing that without God's intervention, there's no chance. That puts us in a place of trust and confidence in God because we know we can't do it on our own. And there's no way Israel had the ability to knock down these walls on their own. The other reason they did this is to possibly just to give God's people an opportunity to obey. There's nothing magical about walking around the wall 6 times for the first 6 days. Nothing mystical about 7 times on the 7th day. I don't believe it created some kind of vibration that caused the walls to fall down. I don't think it could ever happen without God breathing on it and causing it to fall. It was just simply an opportunity for Israel to obey. Now, if you're a parent here today, you understand there are times when you tell your kids something and an explanation just won't do. You just need them to obey. Simply because you've got experience, simply because you've been there, you've done that, you don't have time to explain, or an explanation isn't gonna really make any difference. You just need them to obey. Now, there's a whole lot of us that suffer from what is called the buddy principle. We think God is our buddy and Jesus is our homeboy. And because Jesus is our homeboy, we think that he understands whenever we decide not to obey because he knows what's in my heart. And if Jesus is your homeboy, then you live with this delusion. So listen, he's not your homeboy. He's your master. He's your savior. He's your Lord. He's your king. And the reality is that what's in your heart comes out in your actions. It's delusional to think that our heart and our actions say 2 different things. Well, this is what's in my heart, but I know my actions say this, but this is what's really in my heart, and my homeboy knows the difference, so I'm okay. No, you're just delusional. It'd be like this. What if you told me you were the biggest Dallas Cowboys fan in the room? And I said, really? Have you ever been to a game? No, never been to a game. Ever watched a game on TV? No, never watched a game. Can you name any of the players? No, can't name any of the players. You own one of their jerseys? No. Well, I'm going to question if you're really a fan or not. Same thing is true with Christianity. You say you're a follower of Christ, but yet you don't really, your actions don't prove what you say. I'm not going to question. Your faith would be questioned by some. Let me say it like that. The fact is, our obedience to God is simply a reflection of our love for God. We don't obey God so he will love us. We obey God because he loves us. And God is giving Israel an opportunity to obey. And if they will obey in this small thing, then God will do something supernatural in their life. And the same is true with every single one of us. If we will obey God in the small things, then that sets us up for God to do the supernatural in our lives. Look at verse number 8. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets. The ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priest and blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. At this time, the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, don't give a war cry. Don't raise your voices. Don't say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to the camp, spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning. The priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. But on the 7th day, they got up at daybreak, marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except on that day, they circled the city 7 times. All right, I said number 1, you need a simple obedience to God. Here's the second key to facing life's greatest challenges. I need to press on to completion. Man, I just need to keep going. Got to keep going. You can't be a quitter. You can't give up. You can't throw in the towel. Every morning, Israel had to get up, put on their walking shoes, and walk about a half a mile around that city. On the 7th day, they did it 7 times. That'd be about 3.5 miles. They just kept on walking. Now think about it. God's asking them to do a repetitive task that really didn't make a lot of sense from their perspective. Does that sound familiar? Some of the things that God asks us to do, that doesn't make any sense. Doesn't seem like it's going to do any good. And we try to figure it out or rationalize it with our way of thinking. Well, it doesn't make sense. But God said, do it. God's not asking them to do something impossible. He's not asking them to do something that's really completely unreasonable, just a simple task, and he wants them to be committed to it. And I think the same thing is true in our lives, that God asks us to just do something simple, maybe repetitive, but here's what happens with a lot of us. We get about day 2 into a lap around whatever the city is you're facing, whatever the wall is that you're up against. And we get around 2 to 3 days into this thing and we don't see anything happening. We don't see any results. We don't see our prayers being answered. We don't see things shifting and changing. We don't see our kids' hearts changing or our spouses' hearts changing or our boss's heart changing. We don't see any change in our income or our paycheck. We don't see anything different in our health. My blood count is still the same. My blood pressure is still high. We don't see anything change. And what do? We start getting a bad attitude. We start thinking, I'm doing all this and nothing's changing, nothing's working. Sometimes we just need to do the right thing, even if our feelings haven't caught up with our actions yet. It's kind of like this. Sometimes we choose to forgive. Okay, I'm going to forgive because I know that's what I'm supposed to do. And I want forgiveness, so I'm going to forgive. And we forgive, but we really haven't felt the freedom from unforgiveness yet. So we keep choosing. But a few days into this, maybe a few weeks into this, maybe a few months into this, you think, I'm not really seeing anything change. The person I'm forgiving is still a jerk, and they still did what they did to me. And so we go right back into that unforgiveness. We give up. We throw in the towel. We quit too early. Same thing with our giving. Sometimes we start giving. Maybe it's whether you're tithe or maybe it's with a faith promise, a missions pledge, and you start giving, you're believing for a return. You believe the law of sowing and reaping. And so you start sowing and you don't see the reaping. You don't see the harvest. You don't see anything changing yet. And so we get a bad attitude. But you got to remember, illustration is kind of like the Chinese bamboo tree. Once it's planted and it's watered and it's cared for, you don't see anything for the first 5 years. But then in the 5th year, it grows 90 feet tall. 90 feet tall in 5 weeks. In 5 weeks, 90 feet, that's twice the height of this building. What's happening the first 5 years? There's a root system being established that will hold that thing when it goes up 90 feet tall. Maybe God's establishing a root system to sustain the blessing he's getting ready to bring you into. But what if we quit and we give up too early? What if we throw in the towel too quick? Then we miss out on what God has for us. God might be telling you to go around that wall once. He might be telling you go around twice, and you've got to continue to be faithful to what he's called you to do. What does the Bible tell us in Galatians 6? Don't grow weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap a harvest if you don't give up. God's delays are not God's denials. Just because you haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it's not coming. Doesn't mean he's not working on it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. You got to put your faith in God and trust that he's going to bring it to pass when he believes it's right. Keep pressing, keep trusting, keep pushing through. Look at verse number 16, Joshua 6:16. 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that's in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies that we sent. But keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. Everyone charged straight in. They took the city, they devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword, every living thing in it, men, women, young, old, cattle, sheep, donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house, bring her out, all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her. So the young men went in, who had done the spying, went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, sisters, all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. They burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab, the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua pronounced this solemn oath: cursed be before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. All right, I said, first of all, you need simple obedience. Number 2, you need to press on to completion. And number 3, I need to be confident in God's promises. This is the strategy to face life's greatest challenges. I need to be confident in God's promises. It's one thing to know what God said. It's another thing to read what God said. But what we need is to have confidence in God's promises. You see, one of the things that we have a problem with, I believe here in America, is that we're obsessed with the next thing. What's the next thing? We get tired and bored with present. What's the next thing? I mean, I don't know, we get conditioned this way. You get a new Apple phone, and by the time you get home and get it unpacked, they're already advertising the next one. So we get conditioned this way. So we get bored with where we are right now, but you've got to be confident in the promises of God so that you can enjoy the journey that you're on. Enjoy every single day that God has given you. Rather than always worrying about tomorrow or putting all hope and faith in tomorrow, enjoy today. Enjoy where you are right here and right now. I mean, we live obsessed with tomorrow. When we're single, we pray, Lord, don't come back till I get married. Then when we get married, Lord, don't come back till I have kids. Then you have kids, say, Lord, come back anytime. These kids are driving me crazy. We're 4 years old. What do? You stay at home, watch TV all day, but wish you were in elementary school. Then you get in elementary school and you wish you were in junior high. You get in junior high, wish you were in high school. You get in high school, wish you were in college. You're in college, you wish you had a job. Then you get a job and you wish you were retired. So what? So you stay at home, watch TV all day like you did when you were 4. We're always obsessed with the next thing. But here, God was doing a work in Israel as they circled. Each lap that they went around, God was doing a work in their life. And I believe the thing that kept them circling that city was the promise that God gave them. He didn't say, I will give you, but I have given you the city. Shout, because I have given you the city. And the wall doesn't come down on lap 2, lap 3, lap 4, it doesn't come down. And even on the 7th day when you're, taking those, it comes down when you complete what God has told you to do. Now here's the challenge. It's not like NASCAR where they hold a sign up and tell you how many laps you have left till you reach the finish line. I wish we had, a sign that said you got 3 years left. You got, 10 years left. You don't have that. A countdown would be nice. We could really be more productive with our lives, or would we? Life doesn't give us that sign. Our job is to simply trust that God's going to do what he promised to do while we do what he called us to do. And if we will do what he called us to do, then God will do exactly what he promised he would do. But what if you've stopped walking? What if you've just given up on that dream, or you've given up on that promise, or you've given up on someone? What if you've given up? What do you do? Somebody asked me, said, I wish I'd have learned this a whole lot earlier in life. I could have saved myself a lot of pain. The fact is, we've all made mistakes that we regret. We all made mistakes that we wish we could take back. What do we do now? You start walking and you keep walking. If you've messed up your marriage, you start walking and you keep walking. What if you weren't there for your kids? You start walking and you keep walking. Messed up my finances, start walking, keep walking. I gave up on God. Start walking and keep walking. You can't look back, but you can move forward. The wall never came down when someone stopped walking. It only came down when they started walking and kept walking. Now, Israel wasn't walking just for God, and they weren't walking just because God told them to. They were walking with God. Look at Joshua 5:13. It says, now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, are you for us or for our enemies? This is one of the most confusing passages in the Bible. Here's an angel. Joshua's doing what the Lord had commanded, and this angel standing there before him. He says, are you for us or are you for our enemies? Neither. Neither. We all would have liked to hear, I got your back, Joshua. I'm with you, Joshua. We know the Lord is for us and not against us, but what in the world did he mean here? Neither, he replied, but as the commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. And then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, what message does the Lord have for his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army replied, take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Why did God not take sides in this moment? You know why God didn't take sides in that moment? It's because God is for obedience. God is for righteousness. God is for faithfulness. When you think about it, they went in, they took Jericho. Who's the first family they spared, or the only family they spared? It was Rahab. Rahab and her family, because she hid the spies and she believed in God. And because she believed in God, she was spared. She was of the Amorites. She wasn't part of the Israelites, but she was spared. And then what we'll find out next week is how Achan stole some of the devoted things that he wasn't supposed to. Achan is an Israelite, and he disobeys God, and he and his family get the axe. Why? Because God is for righteousness. God is for obedience, and God is for faithfulness. And every single one of us need to know God's not here picking sides saying, I'm for you, I'm not for you, and I'll be with you, but I'm not going to be with you. No, God is with us. He's with each and every one of us. And maybe you've walked out on God. Maybe you quit on God's promises. Maybe you quit on what God has called you to do. It's time for you to put your walking shoes back on and start walking with God. Start walking with him. He'll make your business better. He'll make your family better. He'll make your life better. He'll make all relationships better. He will make our city better if we'll just begin to walk with him. So it's time for us, Freedom Church, it's time for us. We can't change the whole world today, but what can we change? I can change me. I can change me. And I can make sure that I'm walking with the Lord because he promises to be with us. He's with faithfulness. He's with obedience. He's with righteousness. So I can make sure that my life is alignment with God's, then I know that he's with me every step of the way. He's going to go before me. He's going to come behind me. He's going to guard me on every side. God has your back. Not one of us have lived perfect lives. Not one of us has it all together. And that's not to say that we shouldn't become better. But God is more interested in your future than he is in your past. If you will just trust him, if you'll put your hope and your faith in him, regardless of where you are on this journey, I promise you, he's going to take down the wall that you've hit, and he's going to allow you to step into the biggest blessing that he has in store for you. Don't give up. Don't quit. There was an angel of the Lord that stood before Joshua. He said, you for us, you for our enemies? Neither. What's the message you have? Take off your shoes, Joshua. You're on holy ground. Was it just the land that he was talking about? No. He was talking about this moment of obedience, this moment of walking with the Lord, this moment of trusting God, not my way of thinking. This moment of believing, if God said the walls are coming down, but it doesn't look like this makes any natural sense, the holy moment is to trust what God says, regardless of what our mind is telling us. And our mind will tell us that the wall that you're facing is too big for you. Your mind will tell you that the wall that you're facing is going to be the enemy that defeats you. What our mind tells us is that God has forgotten us. Our mind tells us a lot of things, but the holy moment is the moment when we say, God, I'm going to trust you regardless of what my mind is telling me, because I'm going to believe these walls are coming down just like you said they were. And I believe we're going to be able to step into our promised land just like you said we would. And I'm going to trust that you are for me, not against me. Would you